Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1879. The wind tore low across the range near the Wind River, kicking up dust and dry grass as Nolan James drew his mare to a stop, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. He had been riding fence all morning, a job he did more out of habit than necessity. His herd was small, and he lived even smaller. Nolan had not spoken to another soul in over 2 weeks, and he liked it that way. Quiet suited him. It was the only thing that did not ask anything of him. But then he saw her. She was a speck at first, barely a shimmer in the heat, staggering along the ridge with no hat and no horse. Her dress was torn at the hem and dust-streaked, her steps uneven. Nolan's chest tightened. He nudged his mare forward. She looked up when she heard him, startled, wary, frozen like a deer half a second from bolting. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, her face sun-reddened and scraped, eyes sharp and frightened beneath tangled curls of dark hair. "Ma'am," Nolan said, tipping his hat as he dismounted. "You all right?" She did not answer right away. Her cracked lips parted, and she shook her head, just barely. "You out here alone?" he asked. "My horse spooked and ran," she said, voice hoarse. "I have been walking since yesterday." Nolan pulled his canteen from the saddle and handed it to her. She drank like she had not seen water in a day, which was likely true. He waited until she lowered it before he spoke again. "I'm Nolan James. My place is about an hour west of here." She looked down at his horse, then back at him. "You ride. I will walk." He shook his head.
"No, ma'am.
"My saddle's yours." She stared at him, confused. "I will walk," he said. "You ride." She hesitated, but then nodded. Her legs trembled as she tried to mount, so Nolan steadied her with both hands and helped her up. She flinched at his touch, but did not pull away. "What is your name?" he asked once she was seated. "Orietta," she said softly. "Orietta Burke." He walked beside the horse in silence as they made their way toward his cabin. She did not say much. He did not press. When they reached his land, a small cabin tucked into a bend of cottonwoods near a creek, Nolan helped her down and led her inside. She looked around like she did not expect the place to be real simple, clean, a small bed in the corner, and a table with 2 chairs. "You live here alone?" she asked, still standing stiff near the door. "Since my brother died," he said, setting a kettle on the stove. "You can rest here a while. You're safe." She did not answer, but she stepped farther in. He gave her space. She ate what he offered, beans and cornbread, and drank again, slower this time. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. "You in trouble?" he asked gently. Orietta stared at the floor. "I was traveling to Cheyenne with my uncle. We were ambushed by 2 men on the trail near Lander. They took the wagon. He tried to fight. They shot him. I got away. I ran. Horse spooked. I have been hiding since." Nolan stayed quiet for a long moment. "Did they follow you?" "I do not think so." Her voice cracked. "I do not know." "You are safe here," he said again. She looked up at him, then really looked. Something in her eyes shifted. Not trust yet, but less fear. That night, she slept in his bed. He did not touch her. He slept in the chair by the fire, gun within reach. In the morning, she was still there. Over the next days, they fell into a rhythm. Orietta helped where she could, washing dishes, sweeping the porch, peeling potatoes. She still flinched at loud sounds, and she did not talk about what had happened. But she began to smile, softly, carefully. And Nolan found himself watching for that smile more than he meant to. One morning, as she hung laundry out back, he brought his saddle out to check the stirrup leathers. Orietta stepped closer, eyes on the worn leather. "You really gave me your saddle," she said. "You walked all that way so I would not have to." Nolan looked at her. "Of course I did." Her gaze flicked up to his. "No one has ever done something like that for me," He swallowed. Well, they should have. She looked down, her hand brushing the saddle horn. I do not know how to repay you. You do not have to, he said. She turned away then, but her fingers lingered on the leather, and he saw her shoulders relax. That night, she sat beside him near the fire. He noticed how close she was, closer than before. Her hand brushed his once, and she did not pull away. Do you ever get lonely? She asked. Nolan stared into the fire. All the time. She was quiet. Then, so do I. He turned his head toward her. Her face was lit soft by firelight, and for the first time, he saw something unguarded there. I lost my parents young, she said. My uncle tried to take care of me, but he had nothing. I was raised rough. I do not know how to be close to people. Nolan's voice was low. Neither do I. She reached for his hand, then not by accident, not a mistake. She took it, held it there between them. And this time, neither of them pulled back. He looked at her, and she looked at him. You do not have to be alone anymore, he said. Her eyes filled, and she nodded once. I do not want to be, she whispered. That night, they did not sleep apart. Orietta curled close against him beneath the quilt, her breath warm at his neck, her hand resting over his heart. And Nolan, who had lived through war, grief, and silence, closed his eyes and slept deeper than he had in years. Orietta stood barefoot on the creek's edge, skirt lifted above her ankles, her toes sunk into the silt as the current played around them. The sun had climbed to its noon height, and the cottonwood leaves shimmered silver in the wind. Nolan watched from the bank, a short length of rope in his hands, mending a bridle that had frayed near the bit. You ever trap crawdads? She asked, not turning. No, he said. Never had much use for him. She crouched, reached beneath a flat stone, and came up empty-handed. They're quick, she muttered, brushing water from her wrist. But I used to catch 5 or 6 at a time when I was 10. He looped the rope through the brass ring, working it snug. Where'd you live then? North of Waco. My mama kept hens, and I kept crawdads in a bucket till they stank up the porch. She smiled faintly. Mama hated that. Nolan leaned against a bent tree trunk, studying the way the light touched her curls. You miss it? I miss the idea of it, she said. Not the place. There wasn't much kindness left after she passed. He said nothing, only tied the knot off with a tight pull. Orietta straightened and stepped back onto the grass. Her feet left damp prints as she walked toward him. You always stay this quiet? He met her gaze. Only when I'm thinking. What are you thinking now? He wiped his palms on his trousers. That I don't know you well enough. And I want to. She sat beside him on the root, close enough that their knees brushed. What do you want to know? He studied her face a moment. What's something you never told anyone? She looked away, toward the far hills. Her voice was quiet when it came. When I was 16, I tried to run away with a boy who promised me the moon. We didn't make it past the edge of town. He left me the second his brother caught wind. Said I was trouble, not worth the fight. Nolan's jaw tightened. He was wrong. She tilted her head, searching his face. You don't flinch when I say things like that. Why would I? Most men want a woman untouched by anything hard. He traced a line in the dirt with a stick. I don't want someone untouched. I want someone who's still standing. Orietta was quiet, but her fingers found his and held them, warm and certain. That evening, she shelled beans on the porch while Nolan stacked kindling for the stove. The sky had turned soft with dusk, and the scent of pine smoke drifted down from higher ground. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. He looked up, brushwood cradled in his arms. Once or twice. But it's steady. Not much else is. If I asked you to come with me somewhere new, she said, would you? He set the kindling down gently. You planning to leave? I don't know yet, she said. But I'm starting to wonder if I could stay. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of something else, something that breathed between them like the wind in the cottonwoods. "I'd go if you asked," he said at last. "But I'd also build you a porch just like this one if you stayed." Orietta looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes didn't carry the weight of escape. They held something steadier, something that looked a lot like home. Later, as the lantern lit the small cabin with its honey-colored glow, she ran her fingers over the worn spine of a book on the shelf. "You read?" she asked. "When the nights are too long." "What's this one?" "Walt Whitman," he said. "Was my brother's. He read it out loud sometimes." Orietta opened the book slowly, as if it might crumble. She read a few lines under her breath, then closed it. "I'd like to hear you read sometime." Nolan took the book from her hands, opened to a dog-eared page, and drew in a breath. Orietta leaned against the table, eyes closed, listening as his voice filled the still room, low and steady. When he finished, she didn't speak. She only stepped forward, lifted his hand, and placed it against her cheek. "I feel safe when you talk," she whispered. "Even more when you're quiet." He rested his forehead against hers. "Then I'll keep doing both." Orietta's lips brushed his, not eager, not uncertain, just a quiet yes. They stood like that for a long while, the fire crackling low, the pages of the book still open between them. And outside, the wind softened as it passed through the trees. 1 week after Orietta arrived, the earth softened beneath a steady rain. It fell through the cottonwoods in a hush, beating on the porch rail, where she sat with her knees drawn up, an old blanket draped around her shoulders. Nolan had gone out early to check on the calf they'd found limping the day before. She waited, eyes on the blurred ridgeline, the sky low and heavy. When he returned, his coat was soaked through, his hat dripping. He stepped onto the porch without a word, set his rifle against the wall, and removed his boots with a grunt. "The little one's favoring its leg less," he said, wringing water from his sleeve. "Should be fine come morning." Orietta nodded, scooting over to make room. He sat beside her, the old boards groaning beneath his weight. "I never liked thunder much," she said, her voice quiet. "That's so." It always came before bad news. She adjusted the blanket, so it covered his shoulder too. "I suppose I still wait for something to follow it." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Sometimes it just rains." She looked at him. "Do you really believe that?" "I think I want to." They sat in silence until the storm passed eastward, leaving only the scent of wet leaves and the distant drip of runoff from the eaves. Birds started again, cautious at first. A flicker landed near the edge of the yard, pecked at the mud. "I used to draw," she said suddenly, "before everything went wrong." He turned to her. "What did you draw?" "Faces mostly. People I'd seen once and wanted to remember. Sometimes I'd make them up, give them a life better than mine." "Why'd you stop?" "I lost the paper first. Then the will." Nolan stood, disappeared inside, and returned with a folded sheet of ledger paper and a charcoal stub he kept for marking fence posts. "It's not fine paper," he said, handing them to her. "But it's yours." Orietta took it without speaking. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the charcoal. She stared at the blank page for a long time, then placed it on her knee and began to draw. He didn't ask what. He only watched the way her shoulders eased, the way her eyes sharpened. By the time the sun edged out from the cloud bank, she had laid down the shape of a face, broad cheekbones, a soft jaw, a mouth not quite smiling. "You," she said softly, and passed it to him. He looked at it a long while. "You remembered more than I would have thought." "I remember everything that made me feel safe," she said, not looking away. That night, she cooked with confidence for the first time onions and salt pork fried down with dry apples from the shed. He brought in fresh eggs from the coop, and they ate as dusk fell, the oil lamp flickering between them. "You ever think of marrying?" she asked. He set his fork down. I did once. We were too young. She moved east, married a banker in St. Louis. You ever think of it since? He met her eyes. Not until now. Orietta didn't answer. She reached across the table and laid her hand on his, warm and steady. Later, with the fire low and the windows dark, she stood at the edge of the bed, her hair loose, her expression unreadable. Would you want me if I stayed? She asked. I'd want you no matter what, he said. But I'd be gladder than hell if you did. She eased beneath the quilt beside him, her body curved into his, her hand resting at his chest. I think I'll draw a house tomorrow, she whispered. One with a porch and a warm stove and a man who reads poems slow. He exhaled into her hair. Draw it just as it is. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the stars blinked through the thinning clouds. The world had not changed much, but inside that small cabin, something had become certain. Quietly, without force, a life was beginning. Orietta stood at the edge of the newly tilled garden, a coil of hair pinned beneath a scrap of lace she'd found in one of Nolan's trunks. The morning was clear, the soil still damp from last week's storm. She pressed a seed into the ground, then another, her fingers caked with earth. Nolan knelt nearby, laying out a second row. He hadn't said much since breakfast, but his presence was steady, like the sun warming the backs of their necks. You ever grow anything besides grass and fence posts? She asked, brushing her hands on her skirt. Had a patch of beans once, he said. Didn't know enough to keep the rabbits out. She smiled without looking up. We'll do better this time. They worked until the sun tipped past noon, then walked down to the creek to rinse off the dirt. Nolan rolled up his sleeves and sat on a flat rock, boots off, toes in the water. Orietta crouched beside him, scrubbing her hands with a bit of sand. I keep thinking about what comes next, she said. He watched the water eddy around their ankles. You mean after planting? I mean after you and me stopped holding our breath. He nodded once, slow. I thought maybe you'd want to go back east. I don't, she said. I never belonged to any place till now. He didn't answer, not with words. He just reached for her hand and held it there, under the surface, where the current curled around their fingers. Later that day, Orietta patched a tear in one of Nolan's shirts while he repaired a broken door hinge. The cabin stayed quiet, save for the occasional creak of wood or the scrape of needle through cloth. You mentioned once your brother read aloud, she said, knotting the thread. What was he like? Nolan paused mid-turn of a screwdriver. He was quicker to laugh than me. Had a way of making things lighter when they weren't. Folks liked him for that. Orietta tied off the seam, folded the shirt neatly. Was he younger? By 2 years. He joined the army before I did. Never came back. She looked up. You ever talk about him before now? No. She rose and crossed the room, placed the shirt in his lap. Thank you for telling me. He set aside the hinge, met her eyes. I didn't know how to carry it till you. That evening, they didn't light the lantern. The dusk was long and silver, and they sat on the porch steps, listening to the frogs call from the far side of the creek. I want to marry you, Nolan said, voice even. Orietta drew in a breath, slow and quiet. You sure? I've never been more. She folded her hands in her lap, then turned to him. I never thought I'd get asked. I'm not soft in the ways women are supposed to be. I don't want soft, he said. I want you, just as you are. She let out a breath that trembled at the edges. Then yes, I'll marry you. They didn't kiss right away. Instead, Nolan reached out and rested his hand over hers, palm to palm. She leaned into his shoulder, and they watched the sky darken together. The next morning, they rode into Lander. Orietta wore a clean dress Nolan had helped wash and lay out to dry. Her boots were scuffed, but polished. Nolan carried a pouch of coins he hadn't touched in over a year. They found the justice of the peace in a room above the blacksmith shop. He was an old man with a soft voice and careful eyes. He didn't ask many questions, Only watched the way they stood side by side, close enough their arms brushed. Afterward, Nolan bought 2 tin cups at the mercantile, and they shared cider on the porch of the hotel before heading home. Orietta leaned against the frame of the wagon he'd borrowed, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "What do we do next?" she asked. "We go home," Nolan said. "And we live." She smiled then, quiet and sure. "I've never had a home before. You do now." As they rode back across the open land, the sun dipped low behind them, throwing their shadows long across the grass. The wind held the scent of wild sage, and the horses moved steady beneath them. Hand in hand, they crossed the last rise before the cabin came into view. A curl of smoke lifted from the chimney, and the cottonwoods whispered soft over the roof. Orietta looked toward it, then at Nolan. "It's good land." "It is," he said. "And it's ours now." And with that, they rode the final stretch together, not as strangers or survivors, but side by side, 2 people who had found each other in the quietest way and chosen to stay. Orietta stood by the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her hands dusted with flour as she worked dough into a neat round. The kitchen smelled of rising bread and the sharp tang of pickled onions Nolan had brought back from a neighbor's trade. Her wedding band, snug on her finger, caught the light each time she turned the dough. Across the room, Nolan set a small wooden box atop the table. He opened it, removed a length of wire, then began restringing the old fiddle he'd kept covered in a rag beneath the bed. Orietta watched him in the quiet, her eyes steady. "You never said you played." "I don't, not well," he said, twisting the peg with careful fingers. "My brother did. I used to tune it for him, try to follow his fingers once he was done." "Do you still remember the songs?" "Bits of them. Some come back when I hear the wind move right through the trees." She turned back to her dough. "Maybe it's time you made your own song." By late afternoon, the bread was cooling on the sill and Nolan had drawn the first few notes from the fiddle, slow and halting. Orietta didn't speak. She let the sound build, low as a hum, until it began to resemble something whole. She sat by the hearth, her hands in her lap, her eyes closed. That night, she brought out a small tin box she'd kept wrapped in cloth at the bottom of her trunk. Inside were 5 folded papers, each bearing a drawing faces, hands, once a pair of boots carefully shaded. "These were the ones I never gave away," she said, placing them gently on the table. "Not because they were best, because they were mine." He studied each one, his fingers never touching the paper, only hovering. "You want to keep them here?" "I want to hang them," she said. "In the hallway, where they'll catch the light." He rose and fetched the hammer, and together they nailed each one with care. When they were done, Orietta leaned into him and laid her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I'd have walls that meant something," she whispered. "You do now," he said. The next morning brought a letter, passed by a rider who'd stopped to water his horse at the creek. Nolan took it, surprised. He hadn't received anything in over a year. The paper bore the seal of Judge Marston, the man who'd married them. Orietta stood at the doorway as Nolan read. "They found the men who took your uncle's wagon," he said slowly. "One confessed. They're to be tried in Cheyenne." She folded her arms, her mouth set. "I don't need to see them again." "You won't have to. He wrote to let you know your uncle's claim was still valid. The court's granting you what was his a parcel of land back east of Rollins." Orietta looked at him, her face unreadable. "That land's yours now," he said. "I don't want it," she said. "Not anymore." "You sure?" She nodded, stepping down to the grass. "I want a life, not a claim." That afternoon, Nolan saddled the mare and rode into town to arrange for the parcel to be sold. He returned at dusk with a folded deed and a small pouch of coin. Orietta met him at the gate. "We can build a barn now," he said. "One with a hayloft." She smiled, reaching for the reins. "And maybe a second room for the drawings." By summer's end, They'd added to the cabin 2 new windows, a wide awning over the porch, and a small fenced area where Orietta planted herbs she'd bartered for mint, sage, and a creeping thyme that smelled like lemon when crushed. The fence had been Nolan's work, each post sunk by hand, each rail measured twice. One evening, Orietta brought out a new drawing, sketched on the back of a feed sack. It showed the cabin, slant of light falling across the porch, a man seated on the steps with a fiddle in his lap, a woman beside him with her hand on his knee. "I want to keep this one," she said. "Where?" "Over the bed. So I'll remember we built this together." He framed it with pine, he'd planed himself. As fall settled in, the trees turned gold, and the mornings carried a bite that made coffee taste sharper. They picked wild apples from the ridge and laid them out on cloth to dry. Nolan carved wooden hooks for the coats, and Orietta stitched a thick quilt from scraps traded at the dry goods store. They rarely spoke of what came before the road she walked alone, his years of silence. Those things had weight, but they no longer lived at the center. What lived there now was the sound of the kettle at dawn, the warmth of her hand finding his beneath the quilt, the fiddle humming through the window some evenings, the scent of bread that lingered long after sunset. One night, as the wind curled around the house and the fire burned low, Orietta turned to him, her voice soft against his chest. "I don't need more than this." He kissed her temple, his voice steady. "You'll always have it." And she did. Through winters that crept in slow and spring thaw that brought mud to the steps, through harvests lean and full, they stayed. Nolan built her a table for her drawings, and she painted the shutters blue. He read aloud when the nights stretched long, and she sang when she churned butter in the morning. They grew old in that cabin by the creek. Not all at once, but in the way good things do, through quiet days, through steady hands, through every small promise kept. And each time he looked at her, Nolan still saw the woman who'd walked out of the dust and changed everything. Because she had. And they had built something that held. And when their days slowed, and the porch wore softer under their feet, they still sat side by side at dusk, fingers twined, heart certain. They had made a life. And they never let it go.